Okay, so we'll continue now on the Mishnah. So we're up to Ches Amud Aleph. We're up to Ches Amud Aleph. We're up to the Mishnah. That's where we're going to start. Zog the Mishnah. Ein bein nedarim l'nedavis. Okay, so what is nedarim? Literally, nedarim means a vow. You make a neder. That means that you make a vow. So, ein bein nedarim u'nedavis. And a nedava means a gift. You know, you give a nedava. Now, these just have different names. There is two ways of obligating yourself to bring a korban. Some korbanos are voluntary korbanos. Some korbanos are korbanos that you have to bring that is mandated by the Torah. So we're saying that how do you bring a gift korban? Either you say, it is upon me to bring an olah. An olah would be a complete sacrifice, which is sacrifice on the Beis Hamikdash. You say it's upon me. What is upon me? Upon me means that you obligated yourself. It's upon me. Let's say you said, I am going to give $100 for the shul. Okay, you made a neder, right? So if you don't have the $100, let's say you had $100 put away for the shul, and then it gets lost, you still owe the $100 because you made an obligation upon yourself. You say, I will give $100 for the shul. But what happens if you say, here is this $100. I'm going to give this $100 bill to the shul. You didn't make a commitment to give $100, but you said, I'm going to give this $100 bill to the shul. So then if that $100 bill gets lost, then you don't owe anything because you never committed yourself to it, but rather you said this particular item you're going to give. The same thing is with a korban. We're talking about a korban. If you say it's upon me to bring a korban, now even though you separated a korban there, you have an animal that you want to bring as a gift, and you separated it, and then it's lost, you're still going to have to substitute it with something else because you made an obligation upon yourself. You said harei olai. If, on the other hand, you said about a certain animal, harei zu, this particular animal is a korban, then all what you're obligated is to bring this animal. If this animal is lost, then you no longer have to bring it. When you say upon me, that's called a neder. That's called nedarim, vows. When you say this, that's called nedava. That's what it goes. The pasuk where it comes from calls them that. So look at the Rashi. What does Rashi say? Neder unedava. The Farish b'Gemara. The Gemara will explain that neder is ha'omer, one who says harei olai oila. It is upon me an oila. An oila is a burnt offering. Ul'achar zman hifrisha. And then later on, he took a animal and he separated it for the korban. The law is chayiv ba'achriyusa. He is responsible for it, which means that if that beast gets lost and he can no longer bring the beast that he separated for the korban, he's responsible for it and he has to bring a substitute. That is what? That is a neder. Nedava. What is a nedava? Nedava is ha'omer harei zu. He says this one. Like kibla olav. That means that he did not accept it upon him as a obligation upon him. That is only this animal. So if that animal is lost, he's not chai b'chriyusa. So that's what he says. There is no difference if you say a neder, which is you say upon me, or you say harizu, this is, which is a nedava. Ella, the only difference is shahnedorim chayav ba'achriyusa. The nedorim, you are responsible for them, and you would have to substitute it. But if it is a voluntary gift, then you are not liable, and you don't have to bring another one. Okay, so this is what the Gemara says. Now, there is a halacha that a person who makes a vow to bring a korban to the mizbeach to offer it, he has 3 holidays to pass. By the 3rd holiday, he must bring it. It's called Bal Ta'achar. The Torah says you can't delay to pay. So if you made a pledge to bring a korban, you have 3 holidays to bring it. Otherwise, you're violating the prohibition of don't delay. But this prohibition of don't delay is written by neder, by the place where it says harei olai. It doesn't say by nedava. In other words, in the case when it says this is the korban, over there the Torah does not write about not delaying it. So the Gemara says, since you're saying that the only difference between when you make a neder or a nedava is if you are responsible to replace it. If it's gone, holy inyan bal ta'achar. But as far as the not delaying matter, zev is a shovin, then they'll both be equal, which means that in both cases you can't delay. If you said harei olai, you can't delay. If you said harei zu, this one, you also can't delay. So what's the chiddush? Ba'af al gav the nidava. Even though the nidava, which is harei zu, bikrod the bal ta'achar lo yikasiva, it is not written in the pasuk of bal ta'achar. So bal ta'achar only talks about what? About a neder, about when you say harei olai. Yet it applies there because we included in Maseches Rosh Hashanah from Gzeir Hashanah. Okay. Zog di Gemara Tanan Hosa. We learned there, this is a Mishnah, learned there, a Zehu Neder. What is a constitute? What is a Neder? Ha'omer, one who says, Harei Olai. Neder means it's upon me. A Zehu Nidava. What is considered to be a Nidava? Ha'omer, one who says, Harei Zu. Oila. This is an oila. Ma bein nidorim l'nidovis. So what difference is there between when you say harei olai oila or you say harei zu oila? What practical difference is there? So the Gemara nidorim by nidorim meisu oy nignavu oy ofdu. If after you separated the korban, they died, they were stolen, they got lost, Mesu, Nignavu, they got stolen, they got lost, Chayiv B'achriyusa. You are liable and you're responsible for them, and you have to bring another one. The fact that you separated and you lost it, you made an obligation upon yourself, you have to bring another one. But Nedava is, if you said that you're just, this is the korban, Mesu or Nignavu or Avdu, if they died, or they were stolen, or they were lost, Einay Chayev B'Achri Yuson, he is not responsible for that. And he doesn't have to replace it. Where do we know these words from? Because one can argue, it would seem, even when you said this is, yes, but you made an obligation to bring a korban. You said this particular beast, but if that's not there, you still have an obligation. Maybe you should bring another one. In other words, I'm translating the word Menanimili mainly. How do we know you're exempt by Nedava? Why you should be responsible, I think that's logical. Because you said you made a commitment. You have to keep your commitment. But we're saying that when you said this, and if it's stolen, you don't have to. What's the source for this? The Gemara says, Mino Hanimili. Where do we know these words from? And the Gemara says, the Tonu Rabbono. As we learned in the Braisa articulates the reason. The verse says about the korban that you bring, it says, V'nirtza loi lechaper olov. That it will atone, it will appease for him, to atone upon him. He translates the word olav over here, upon him, like the person who says olai. It will appease and atone for the person who said olai, meaning he is the one that has to bring the korban because it's olav, it's olai, it's upon him, because he undertook it. He said harei olai, it's upon me and oila. So Reb Shimon translated as follows: Es she'olov, the one that's upon him. He said olai, chai b'achri yusod. Pasuk says nirtza loy lechaper olav. The es she'enei olav, but the one that's not upon him, enei chai b'achri yusod, then he is not responsible. Let's look at Rashi. Es she'olov chai b'achri yusod. So Rashi, Hochi Dorish Leilikro. This is the way he expounds the verse. Nirtza loy nidroi, that his vow will be appeased, accepted. Kapir bohem havi nirtza. So when he is atoned for them, the chaper olav, when it is atoned, then he is accepted. But before the kapara, he is not accepted, which means he has to bring it in order to be in a case of olav. Which korban did I tell you that when you're accepted, when it's makaper, olav the kro. That is the meaning when it says olav in the pasuk. The one that's upon you. The nirtzaloi, when is it going to be accepted to you? Lechaper, when it atones. Until it atones, until you bring the korban, it doesn't atone for you. When is that stipulation? Olav. That's the one that you say alai then. But the one that's zerizu, it's appeased even if you didn't accept it. It's still going to the eshe'ein olav, ein chai b'achri yusod. Then you're not responsible. So Gemara says, "My mashma," but how is the understanding in the language? My mashma, the olav kabbalah sachrayis olav. Why is the understanding of upon me, meaning I accept the responsibility? Maybe the word when he said upon me, I'm going to do it, but he doesn't say I'm going to do it even if it's lost. He just said I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it, but I didn't accept I'm going to do it, even if it's lost. But Omar of Yitzchak bar Avdimi, Yitzchak Avdimi says, Kivon the Omar Olai, once you say upon me, is Kiman the Toin Akas Fidomi. Like you load it on your shoulders. In other words, that's an obligation. It's an obligation on your shoulder. That's why the word Olai means that. That's what the pasuk means when it says Nitzal Lechaper Olav. And only when you say Hare Olai is when you have to replace it, even if it's lost or stolen or dies. Okay, next Mishnah. So this Mishnah gets involved with a mission, bodily emission from the male organ, which is called a zov. Zov means a flow. So there is a flow. There is what's called a carry. That's a one-time nocturnal emission, which makes the person tamei just for one day, a regular tumah. But then there is another kind of a flow, which is a more serious tumah, which is if you see twice, either twice in one day or one day after the other day. So you see twice. That's called a zav, means a man with a flow. And by the way, I don't choose the Mishnahs. This is what the Gemara says, so bear with me. And the second is, and so when you see twice in one day or one day after the other, that's called seeing consecutive. If you see one day and a day in between, you don't see, then you see the next day, that's not considered. It's either you see twice in one day or one day after the other. There is also a zav that saw 3 times. 3 times in what way? Either he saw 3 times in one day, or he saw 3 consecutive days, or he saw 2 in one day and 1 in the next day. Any combination of this. And again, if there is a day in between, then that is not considered one consecutive. So what's the difference? Is there a halachic difference between a zav who has seen twice and a zav that has seen 3 times? The only difference is the Torah says that a zav brings a korban, that he brings a sacrifice on the day that he becomes clean. After the 7th day that he counts, he has to bring a korban, and then he can go into the Beis Hamikdash after he brings the korban. So the difference between a zav of 2 re'iyas, 2 sightings, and a zav of 3 re'iyas is whether you bring a korban or not. The zav has special tumah powers, which means tumah, more than a balkeri, more than a one-time sighting. In what way? The tumah of a regular tumah, if it's not a zav, then if they touch the other item, they're mitame. They make it tame. They make it tame for the day. And you have to put it into the mikveh, whatever they touch. That's a regular tumah. But a zav is also mitame b'mishkav b'moshav, which means if he sits or lies on a chair, for example. So even though he only comes in contact with the top layer, but everything underneath him becomes tummy. Also, if he tilts he's not touching it, but he, like on a seesaw, let's say he'll pick up a dish and he pushes the other side, he will be metama. Those are special laws of tumah that apply to a zav. So what the Mishnah says, it makes no difference whether a zav who has seen 2 sightings or whether he's seen 3, ela korban. The only difference is whether you bring a korban. That if you saw 3 sightings, you bring a korban at the end. If you only saw 2, there is no korban. Rashi, 2 sightings either in one day or 2 consecutive days. But like I said, seeing in one day and then not seeing the other day, then seeing on the 3rd day would not be considered consecutive. That's like 2 separate sightings. He's not a zav. That's like a regular balkeri. The chein sholish, same thing when we talk about 3 sightings. It's either b'yoyim echad, it's done in one day, or it's 3 consecutive days, or 2 in one day, 2 in one day, and 1 the next day. Apparently, I'm just reading the Rashi, not so familiar with halacha. If it would be the other way, if we would see 1 on the first day and 2 on the second day, maybe that wouldn't count either, because Rashi gives the example, so I'm assuming that it doesn't work the other way. Okay, that's the Mishnah. The Gemara. Zog the Gemara, holy inyan mishkav v'moshav. But what about the matter of mishkav v'moshav, which means the special halacha of tumah that applies to a zav, that if they sit or lie, mishkav means lying, moshav sitting, they would make everything underneath them tameh, special chumrah, even though they didn't touch it, they're just sitting on it. The weight that makes them tameh, that seems to be equal. Holy in mishkav v'moshav, as far as mishkav v'moshav. Rashi, mishkav v'moshav, shochav or yoshav al gabe asora begodim ze al ze. If he lie or he sat on 10 garments that are one on top of the other. If he touched, then only the top one would become tameh. But because he's metameh, the mishkav v'moshav, all the 10 garments become tameh. Kulon avos hatumah, they all become the father of tumah, first level of tumah. Even if he didn't touch it, just sitting over them, he didn't touch it with his body. Just sitting on them, he would make them tameh. But v'ilu nogar bedavar she'einu mishkav v'moshav. But if you touch an item which is not where you sit or you lie, it has to be a chair, has to be a bed, has to be something that you sit and lie on in order to get that level of tumah. But what happens if you touch something which is not a mishkav v'moshav? Eino elo rishon l'tumah. First of all, the item that you touch becomes the first level of tumah versus the father of tumah. Father of tumah is one step up on top of a first level of tumah, and therefore ve'enoi metame adam v'kelim ella oichlinu mashkin. The rishon l'tumah. This is the laws of tumah. A rishon for tumah cannot make a person or vessel's tummy, only food or drinks. Basically, in order for a tumah to be metame, a person or a vessel, it needs to be an av hatumah, father of tumah. So when the zav sits on the chair or on the bed, and you have 10 garments underneath, each one of the garments becomes an av hatumah, a father of tumah. If any of them, either of those garments, will now go and touch a person, that person will become tameh, because they're an avatuma. So a person can get tameh. If they will touch a keli, become a tameh, and will get a tameh. But if the zav doesn't sit on it, but he just touches, and it's not mishkav v'moshav, it's not sitting on it, then he only makes it a rishon l'tumah. And only the thing he touched, that thing that he touched cannot in turn make the next garment which is under him tameh by touching it, because he only became a rishon l'tumah, and the rishon l'tumah cannot be metama, not a person, not kelim. So basically what he's saying is, a zav, whether he saw 2 times or he saw 3 times, in both cases, he would be metame mishkav v'moshav. Even with 2 times alone, he does metame mishkav v'moshav. And another halacha, a zav has to count shiva nikiyim. A person, like I said, a person who's about carry just has an emission 1 time. Over there, he's just tummy till the nighttime, and that's it. But a balkeri who is a zav, somebody who's a zav, he has to count 7 days, clean days, just like a woman after her menstrual cycle. We say that she has to count 7 days, That's midrabona now today because depending on the cycle, but today we always count 7 clean days. The same thing is the Zav would have to count 7 clean days. So the Gemara says also as far as the Inyan of Mishkav Umoishav and Usviras Shiva and counting 7 days, Zeh v'Zeh Shavim. This one and this one are equal. Who is this one and this one? Meaning whether you saw Shteiriyas or whether you saw Roya Sholish, you would still have to do Siva Nikim. When do the Shiva Nikim counted? Once he sees no more flow, then he has to start counting. Svira Shiva, so Rashi says, Mishayivsek. Once he stops the flow, Sorich Limnei Zayin Nikim, he must have 7 clean days, Koidim Sheyitvel, before he can immerse. The Im Ro Zoiv Be'echad Mehem, if he sees a flow in one of them, in one of the Shiva Nikim, Sosar Kol HaManuim, he has knocked down all those that counted, he has to start counting over again the Shiva Nikim. So now, again, so the Gemara says, as far as a korban, you have a difference between seeing 2 times and 3 times. If you see 2 times, you don't bring a korban. If you see 3 times, you do bring a korban. But as far as being Metam and Mishkav Moshev, to make everything an Av Hatuma that you sit on, whether you saw 2 or 3 times, you're going to make him all an Av Hatuma. The same thing is as far as counting 7 times, whether you saw 2 times or you saw 3 times, you have to count Shiva Nikim. Frag the Gemara, from where do we know these words? Shavim l'tuma ve'en shavim l'korban. Who tells us that 2 and 3 times Zav are equal for the Tuma, for the Mishkav Amoich and the counting of Shiva, but ve'en shavim l'korban, they're not the same of the korban. That one who sees 2 times does not bring a korban. So the Gemara, the Ton Rabbana, because we learned in Abraisa, Rabbi Simoi Oimer. Simoi says, so he brings us, this was articulated in the Braisa. Mona hakosuf shtayim, the Torah counts 2 times Zov, the Korei Tomei, and it calls him Tomei. The word Zov means a flow, but it's not been determined how many times. How do we know a flow? What does it mean, a flow? How do we know how to interpret it? So he says the Torah counts 2 times. It says 2 times Zov, and it says Tomei. Look Rashi. Mon ma'akosu shtayim. It says like this. The ish, this is the verse. The ish kiyiya Zov mibsoirei zoivoi Tomehu. A man who will have a flow from his flesh, zoivoi, his flow, Tomehu is Tomei. How many times does it say in this pasuk Zov? Twice. Zov once, Zoivoi twice. 2 times Zoivoi, the Torah says Tomei. That makes it Tomei. Hare, Shtei Zivois Menuyos Kan. We have 2 times counted here. Zoivos, V'korohu Tomei. The verse says Tomehu, he's Tomei. That means that 2 times citing Tomei. We also have another pasuk, Sholish V'korei Tomei. Sometimes we see the other pasuk that it says 3 times Zov, and the pasuk calls him Tomei. Diksiv. This pasuk, it says like this: V'zois tia tumosei b'zoivei. This shall be his tumah when he has the flow. That's 1. Then it says Ror b'soira zoivei. His flesh has been running the zoiv, the flow. Or his blood, his flesh has become spotted from his flow. In the pasuk 3 times. Zoivoi, Zoivoi, and Zoivoi. 3 times Zoivoi. Harelach Sholish. the Torah says, Tumasoi, Kori Tomei. So what are we going to do? We have 2 times or 3 times. We have seemingly, it's a contradiction. Okay, so the problem is Rashi explains, okay, so if 2 is sufficient to make him Tomei, Lamat Parat Lacha Kosu Shalish. So why did the Torah specify you 3 times? So there's a difference. So we have to say there's some laws that apply to Shtayim and some laws that apply to Shalish. So therefore we say Shtayim L'Tuma. For the laws of Tuma, twice is enough for all laws of Tuma. The Shalish L'Korban. And 3 for bringing a korban. Because we need to make a distinction between the 2 and 3. Because otherwise, why does the Torah make them separate? Well, if the only the reason is because you have to make a difference, why don't we say, why don't you say, Shtayim l'tuma v'loy l'korban, maybe 2 for a tuma and not for a korban. Okay, because that, like you're saying, but sholish lekorban v'lei letuma. Say sholish will have a korban and not be tamei. So 2 for tuma, like you said. But why did you say sholish? Maybe bring a korban and don't get. We're not meaning it's not tamei at all. The minimum level of tuma of a balkeri, which is tamei, 1 day, that's for sure. But we're talking about not going to be 3 times. V'lei letuma. Chamura, not for the serious tumor of Shiva Nikiyim that we're going Elka Balkeri Balma and just like a Balkeri. And Rashi is explaining when the Gemara says by 3 it's going to be only a korban, not tumor. It doesn't mean no tumor at all. He doesn't mean not the tumor of Azov, not the tumor of Mishkav and Moshev, and the tumor of Shiva Nikiyim. What kind of question is that? So the Gemara Amrit, you'll say, but actually Ra Sholish Rosh time, he had already seen 2. Before he sees 3, he already sees 2. So if at 2 you're saying he gets Tuma, so how would it fly away the Tuma when he sees 3? Actually Ra Sholish Rosh time. He already saw twice, so it has to be Rosh time, Rashi. He had already descended to all the strings of Tumah because you're saying 2 gets Tumah. So how will he, when he sees the 3rd time, say, oh, bring a korban but you're not Tumah? He's already Tumah from the 2 when he saw. Who taking him out from this Tumah? Okay, the Gemara says, well, that's not a good question, but I have another question. And why don't you stay? Shtayim lekorban v'loy letuma. That 2 will be, if you saw 2 sightings, you'll only get a korban, but you're not going to become the serious tuma, the tumas zav, and sholish af letuma. The sholish has to go up a step. So why don't we say the step it goes up that it also becomes tummy, but Shtayim is not going to get a tuma. How do you know Shtayim doesn't get a korban, but it's tuma? Maybe it's the other way. Maybe the Shtayim gets a korban, it's not Tomei. And the Gemara says, Lo yisal kadaitach. That shouldn't enter your mind to think that 2 should not become Tomei and only a korban. That shouldn't forget about it. The Tanya, because the pasuk in Vayikras of the Zion, it says, after it brings the korban, it says, V'chiper olav hakoyen lifnei Hashem, Mi zoivai. The kohen will atone from him. Mi zoivai means from his flow, but mi zoivai means from partial flows, meaning that only partial flows require korban. Mi zoivai mashma mikza zoivai. It means a partial of a flow, which really means mikza zoivai mevi'in korban. some. So the pasuk mizoiva is and implies that only some zov bring korban. So mikza zovim may be in korban, or mikza zovin ain't may be in korban, and some zovim do not bring a korban. Okay, Tzad, how is this? Which ones do? We know Rosh Sholish. Maybe if you saw 3 times, you bring a korban. Shtaymeina, maybe 2, you don't bring a korban. So we know that a korban is only brought sometimes. So by 3 you'll bring, and by 2 you won't bring. Maybe it's the other way around. Maybe Rosh Sholish, maybe you're going to say, if you saw 2, you're going to bring. Or what you know is, some do and some don't. Maybe say that the one who saw 2 brings it. If you saw 3, you don't bring it. But that can't be possible, as the Gemara said. Amrit Rosh Sholish Rosh Tai. Before he saw 3, he saw already 2. So we know that one brings a korban and one doesn't bring a korban. How do we know that? How do we know that one brings a korban, not all of them? Because the pasuk says mi zoi voi. The word mi zoi is understood. Mashmas mikza zovim meviin korban, mikza zovim meviin korban. Which one could we say is the one that brings the korban? The only one we can say that brings the korban is the sholish. Because if we say that it's the 2 that brings the korban, doesn't make any sense. If the 2 was already obligated to bring a korban, how could he? And then he saw it a 3rd time. So where did it disappear? He was already mechuyev in a korban. He never brought the korban. How did it disappear? So if you can say only one of the 2, it has to be the 3rd one. Okay, so now we know that the 3rd one, so seeing 3 times brings you a korban, right? And we also know that the seeing twice is not on the same level as seeing 3 times, because the Torah gives you 2 separate. So I know 3 brings a korban, and I know that 2 has to become tummy. Because the Torah says a korban he doesn't bring. So what does he bring? So he has to bring something. So again, we know that the korban has to be brought by somebody who sees 3. Can't be the one that sees 2. Because if it's the one that sees 2, then what happened? How would the 3 not get it? So it has to be the one that sees 3 times. And we also know that the one who sees twice, therefore, by definition, since the Torah says that there's a sighting of 2, he gets, so what is he going to get? He's not going to get a korban, so he has to get something, so he's going to get the tumah. So the Gemara explains now, the itzrich derab simoi, the itzrich mizoy. We need both what Simoi said, and we need the pasuk mizoy that we're learning now. If we just the imid Rabbi Simoi, because the Gemara asked before, what did Rabbi Simoi said? Rabbi Simoi just tells us there's 2 and 3. He says there's one pasuk, he says 2 times zoif, and the other pasuk, he says 3 times zoif. So we know there's 2 and 3. But from the pasuk of Rabbi Simoi alone, that we know that there's 2 and 3, but we're not sure over there, Kikushim, then we have a problem in our question, because we don't know whether 2 gets Tumah and 3 gets the korban, or maybe 2 gets the korban and 3 gets the addition. We don't know which one the 2 gets. We know that there's 2 and 3, And we know that 3 is more stringent than seeing 3 times is more stringent than seeing 2 times. We know that. But we don't know in what is the stringency of the 3. Is the stringency of the 3 and the carbon, or the stringency of the 3 is the tumah? So therefore, we need the pasuk mizoyvei to tell you, no, that there is someone that doesn't get a carbon. Once we know that he doesn't get a carbon, so I know that the 3 stringency is with tumah. He gets a carbon and tumah. But the im is zoyve, for just some zoyve, lo yidana kamaris, we don't know. If we know some zoyve, but you still don't know 2, 3. That's based on Rabbi Simoy. Lo yidana kamaris, high miktsas. When we say parsh the mashma ma'ikro, you learn out that some bring a carbon, some not. But lo yadina mai, we don't know how much it is. How much is miktsas? Is it 2? A sholish, v'arba yishtayim sholish? We don't know. Either it's 3 and 4. Maybe it's 3 and 4. How do we know it's 2 and 3? That's what we need the pasuk of Rabbi Simoy. Kamashlan the Rabbi Simoy. That's why it's coming to Rabbi Simoy. Basically, Rabbi Simoy defines to us what is the 2 possibilities. One is 2 and one is 3. From the pasuk Mizoyver, we know some yes, some no. We don't know how many. We know 2, 3, or 3, 4. We don't know. So therefore, we need Rabbi Simoy. From Rabbi Simoy alone, we don't know what the stringency of the 3 is over the 2. Whether, like we say now, 2 is Tomei and 3 adds a carbon, or 2 brings a carbon and 3 adds a tumah. But since it says, so they both bring carbons. They both bring carbons. But since it says mizoivoi, which means only some bring carbons, so we know that it's the 3 that brings the carbon, and it is the 2, the one that says 2, that is tummy. Make sense? It's a little bit confusing over here. Okay. I think it's enough confusing for one day. Let's just do a little bit of art on the parsha. We'll leave the rest of for next week in Mitzvah Shem, okay? Okay, so this week's portion is this portion of Devarim. Week's portion is a portion of Devarim. And there's a lot of very important psukim in this week's parsha. First of all, we have the 10 Commandments, the repetition, the Aseret Dibros. And then we also have the pasuk, the Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu. The whole Shema is in the portion of Eschanon in this week's. A lot of other important psukim. Now, one of the interesting things the Rebbe brings out is that the mitzvah of learning Torah is in the parsha of the Shema. It says, "Vishinantom levonecha," you shall teach them to your children. V'dibarta bom, and you shall speak about the words of Torah. Shivtecha b'veisecha v'lechtecha b'derech. Person is always obligated to study Torah. Dibarta bom. Also, the mitzvah of Kriyat Shema. Something unique about the study of Torah. This is the only mitzvah that the Torah tells us that we must teach our children. Children under bar mitzvah are not really mechuyev in any mitzvahs of the Torah. Even parents that have to educate their children, that's a halacha from the Rabbanan. Rabbis say that the father must educate the children. Exception is the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. Torah says, "Vishinantam levonecha," talking about young children, children who are underage, and still there's an obligation to teach them Torah. And it's interesting, the laws in the Rambam, when he talks about the laws of studying Torah, as well in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, they first start off with the laws about teaching children. So why is children so important in the study of Torah? Why is children so important? And the Rebbe brings out an interesting idea that Torah versus mitzvahs, Torah involves the intellect. Study, you understand, you figure out, you grasp it, you appreciate it, connect with it. It's Torah. Mitzvahs, you do. It's an act. When a person goes and does a mitzvah, just by the definition, you see that you're listening to Hashem. Mitzvah means a command. Who commands you? Hashem commands you, and you're doing the mitzvah. When you put on the tefillin, you go and you daven, whatever you do, which means you're basically saying, I'm listening to Hashem. Why are you doing it? Because you're accepting the yoke of the mitzvah. You're saying, Hashem told me to do it, I'm doing it. But when you're learning Torah and your intellect is involved in it, over there is a worry that because you understand Torah, you might come to conclusion, I'm smart, I can figure it out, I understand it. And this may actually cause you to misinterpret certain laws of the Torah. And you can learn Torah and come up with the wrong conclusions as well. And that's why we make a bracha before we learn Torah. We actually make a bracha by any mitzvah. That's basically thanking Hashem for connecting us. But we make a special bracha more than the mitzvah for learning Torah. We make a bracha, Asher Kedishon, we make a bracha, Shabachar Bono Mikol Ha'amim, Nasambono Estorasa. Hashem gave us our Torah. Why? Because the first approach of Torah needs to be a humility and an understanding that what we're going to study now is way beyond our grasp. It's way higher than ever we can figure out. It's the chachma, the wisdom of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And with the good grace of Hashem, He allowed us to understand a little bit. But we need to have our level of bracha, of subjugation, and accept and say, well, this is the Torah of Hashem. That's why before we do learn Torah, we have to say Hashem. And then when we get involved in Torah, once we get excited about the ideas, especially when you're debating an idea and you come to a false conclusion that, you got it and you know it. And sometimes, you debate. I know a lot of people, if they come and they say an opinion, they won't backtrack, even if they realize they're wrong, They have an argument and they lose the argument, and yet they won't admit that they lost the argument. They'll keep on insisting that they were right, and they'll keep on arguing that they're right. And Torah could be the same way. Torah can be learned in a way, a person learns something, maybe somebody comes and shows him, he says, you know what, let me show you what the real meaning is. But he's too proud, he doesn't want to admit, he doesn't want to give in. He says, no, insists that way. Torah needs to be studied with humility. And when you're studying Torah, you have to realize that it's the truth of Torah and the holiness of Torah that one should be seeking. It's not about who is smarter. It's not about who is greater. It's not about who's going to be right at the end. It's about the Torah of Hashem. And the Rebbe says the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos that we learned during this Shabbos basically addresses these two ideas. One Mishnah says that one who learns Torah as a child is considered like writing on a new piece of paper. If you learn Torah as an old person, it's like writing on an erased piece of paper. Of course, it's not crisp, it's not so clear as in a. So basically, it's trying to encourage you to learn Torah when you're young. So Rebbe asked, but why does he have to finish and say, what is it? If a person didn't have the opportunity, he's telling you if you didn't learn when you're young, you should not learn Torah. That sounds not reasonable. But the Rebbe says the idea here is like we were saying before, learn Torah like a child. Accept the Torah. Don't learn Torah like you're an older person, like you know it all, and you've mastered it all, and that you know it all. Learn Torah like a child. Appreciate and respect the Torah, that it's much more greater than you are. So don't try to feel, and then you'll be able to approach the Torah in a proper way. The other Mishnah says over there, it quotes down that when your enemy falls, quotes the pasuk from Mishlei, from Shlomo HaMelech, when your enemy falls, your heart shouldn't rejoice. When he stumbles, don't have your heart be happy. Hashem may see, he won't like it, and he will remove the anger of Yosem and Charan, remove the anger from him. So the question that all the Mefarshim ask, Shmuel HaKotan says it, Shmuel the Small, he was a humble person, they called him Shmuel HaKotan. What is he repeating a verse in the Mishnah and Pirkei Avos? He doesn't say anything. So the rabbis, the Mefarshim explain that he was talking about, that the pasuk is talking about in the world when your enemy falls. But here we're talking about a debate of two Talmidei Chachamim, and one of them is successful to prove his point, and the other one misses out. So you might feel, you know what? I brought out the point. You feel haughty. You feel that stronger. He says, no. Don't consider Yivecha. Don't. Torah has to be studied. The prayer was in a Mechunya Ben Akona. The Mishnah says he used to go into the Beis Medrash. He used to say that prayer, I shouldn't be happy when my friends make a mistake, and my friends shouldn't be happy if I make a mistake. That's the whole idea of Torah needs to be studied with humility. And that's why the Torah, when it talks about the study of Torah, the Torah talks about teaching your son Torah, teaching him to, meaning that you yourself should also be on that level of like a child, learning Torah with a proper respect, with a proper approach. And that way, you'll be successful. All right, that concludes the shir for today. And see everybody next week. And I'll have a discussion with you, Dr. Wise. I want to ask you a question. So I'll call you on the phone right soon after this.
Okay.
Have a good one.
Thank you.